Hi, and welcome to Historical Influence. To understand the birth of the United States, we must first look to the intellectual currents that shaped the mind of Thomas Jefferson. July 4th is celebrated with fireworks and grand displays, but the true spark of the revolution was ignited decades earlier by philosophers of the Enlightenment. Among the most profound influences on the American colonists was the English philosopher John Locke. It has been said that Locke's justification of revolt, based on the theory of natural rights, provided the essential background from which the Declaration of Independence sprang. When we read the defining words of the American founding, we are hearing echoes of the 17th century. 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, leaders like John Adams and George Washington were already quoting Locke almost verbatim, resolving that colonists were entitled to life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson, heavily influenced by Locke's second treatise of government, absorbed these ideas of inalienable rights. However, Jefferson famously adapted Locke's triad of rights, changing property to the more poetic and broad pursuit of happiness. The connection between the Enlightenment philosophers and the American rebels was not vague, it was textual and precise. Locke argued that mankind is generally disposed to suffer evils while they are sufferable, rather than righting themselves by resistance. Jefferson wove this exact sentiment into the Declaration, writing that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Locke argued that when a long train of abuses makes a government's tyrannical design visible, the people must rouse themselves to secure their safety. Jefferson mirrored this, stating that when a long train of abuses and usurpations evinces a design to subject them to arbitrary power, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Thus, the philosophical foundation of America was not a sudden invention, but a condensation of Enlightenment arguments into a revolutionary weapon.
Before he was a statesman on the world stage, Thomas Jefferson was a lawyer and a thinker in Virginia. His political life began at the age of 19, and even as a young adult, he grappled with the contradictions of his society. While today we know him as a slaveholder, the records of his early legal career reveal a complex internal struggle. During his 7 years as a practicing lawyer, Jefferson took on 6 cases pro bono representing slaves suing for their freedom. In these cases, he even paid the court costs out of his own pocket, suggesting an early sympathy for those in bondage, particularly of mixed racial descent. Jefferson's evolution into a revolutionary thinker was driven by his desire to improve the condition of his country, moving from nature to culture, from the uncultivated to the civilized. He viewed the natural state of Virginia as a landscape in need of human intervention and improvement, favoring an agrarian society over the crowded, urbanized culture of Europe. As the conflict with Britain intensified, Jefferson's pen became his sword. He was known as the pen of the Revolution, while his colleague John Adams was the voice. His writing style was characterized by a classical purity, designed to be rational, chaste, and unadorned, yet moving. However, scholars note that despite his preference for rationality, Jefferson understood the art of power. He knew how to utilize specific rhetorical strategies, often masking his drive for control behind a demeanor of calm reason. By 1774, in his A Summary View of the Rights of British America, Jefferson had already adopted a radical tone. Unlike earlier colonial petitions that were deferential to the monarch, Jefferson addressed the king as an equal, lecturing him and indicting his person directly. He was already constructing a narrative of a conflict between freedom and tyranny, leaving the colonies no choice but to resist. This Virginia gentleman was transforming into the architect of a new political reality. In the summer of 1776, Jefferson drafted the document that would define his legacy. We often think of the Declaration of Independence as a static, finished product, but looking at Jefferson's original rough draft reveals a much more fiery and controversial text. In his original draft, Jefferson did not call the truths of the new nation self-evident. He wrote, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." This language elevated the American cause to a religious, almost holy status. He declared that all men are created equal and independent, deriving rights inherent and inalienable. The structure of the Declaration was a calculated rhetorical drama. It began with universal principles, but quickly transitioned into a relentless accumulation of grievances against King George III. Jefferson employed a strategy of scapegoating, focusing all blame on the king rather than Parliament, creating a single villain for the colonists to unite against. He accused the king of having plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. However, the most significant difference between Jefferson's draft and the final version was a blistering condemnation of slavery. In a passage later excised by Congress, Jefferson accused the king of waging cruel war against human nature itself by captivating a distant people and carrying them into slavery. He described the slave trade as piratical warfare and the opprobrium of infidel powers. Jefferson wrote that the king was determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, capitalizing the word men to emphasize their humanity. He argued that the king was now inciting these very slaves to rise in arms against the colonists, paying off former crimes against the liberties of one people with crimes against the lives of another. The Continental Congress, wary of alienating Southern colonies and British sympathizers, removed this section. While the final document declared the colonies free and independent states, Jefferson's original draft more forcefully stated that they reject and renounce all allegiance and subjection to the kings of Great Britain. The final text was a compromise, but even in its edited form, it successfully established an indelible popular image of the king as a tyrant. Following the Revolution, Jefferson continued to shape the machinery of the new nation. He considered his authorship of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom one of his 3 greatest achievements, so much so that he insisted it be inscribed on his tombstone. This statute was revolutionary, guaranteeing freedom of religion to people of all faiths, including Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, and serving as a precursor to the First Amendment. As the 3rd president of the United States, Jefferson faced a geopolitical crisis that would test his strict interpretation of the Constitution, the fate of the Louisiana Territory. In 1802, Jefferson learned that Spain had secretly ceded this vast territory back to France under Napoleon. Jefferson saw the French presence in New Orleans as a dire threat. He wrote that while America had looked to France as a natural friend, holding New Orleans made France a natural and habitual enemy. He feared that France's impetuosity and energy would lead to eternal friction with the United States. The situation was so critical that Jefferson, usually a Francophile, contemplated marrying the United States to the British fleet for protection. However, diplomacy prevailed. When Napoleon offered to sell the entire territory for $11.25 million, Jefferson faced a dilemma. As a strict constructionist, he questioned his executive authority to purchase land, as the Constitution did not explicitly grant this power. Ultimately, the benefits outweighed the risks. The purchase doubled the size of the United States, removing a major military rival from its borders. To understand this new dominion, Jefferson dispatched Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their corps of discovery mapped the continent, documented new tribes and species, and laid the groundwork for American expansion to the Pacific. Thomas Jefferson remains one of the most complex figures in American history, a walking paradox. In the political sphere, he championed equal and exact justice for all men. Yet, in his personal sphere, he enslaved hundreds of people. Despite his early legal work for slaves and his draft of the Declaration calling slavery a cruel war against human nature, he freed only 5 slaves in his will. His intellectual legacy is marred by his writings in Notes on the State of Virginia. While he recognized slavery as a moral wrong that would bring divine punishment, writing, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just," he simultaneously advanced pseudo-scientific arguments about the natural inferiority of black people. He critiqued their physical features and mental faculties, claiming they were in reason much inferior. This inconsistency, advocating for liberty while holding racist beliefs, bleeds through his life and work. The controversy extends to his private life. DNA evidence has confirmed a genetic link between the Jefferson and Hemings families, supporting the long-debated claim that Jefferson fathered children with his slave, Sally Hemings. Memoirs from Madison Hemings, one of these children, recalled Jefferson as a father who showed no special partiality to his enslaved offspring, contrasting sharply with his affection for his white grandchildren. Yet, Jefferson's story also contains a powerful narrative of reconciliation. For years, he and John Adams, the other titan of the Revolution, were bitter political rivals. But late in life, aided by their mutual friend, Dr. Benjamin Rush, they broke their silence. They exchanged dozens of letters, healing their wounds. In a final, almost poetic twist of fate, both men struggled to live to see the 50th anniversary of the Declaration. On July 4, 1826, John Adams passed away. His last words claimed to be, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He was wrong. Jefferson had died just hours earlier. These two men who had fought for, built, and expanded the nation departed it together on its day of Jubilee. Jefferson left behind a nation fostered and fixed in principles of liberty, yet burdened by the assemblage of horrors of slavery he denounced but could not end. It is this dual legacy of soaring ideals and deep human flaws that defines Thomas Jefferson to this day. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.